Hey guys, tonight we are drifting into a bit of a historical mystery, one that lay hidden for centuries beneath the dense canopy of the Amazon rainforest, only to be revealed by us, mostly. We're talking about vast, ancient geometric shapes carved into the earth, a surprising tale of pre-Columbian Amazonian geoglyphs. Imagine, if you will, you're soaring in a slightly rickety, definitely not commercial-grade airplane. The kind where the pilot looks like they might have wrestled a jaguar for the ignition keys and won, just barely. Below you, the Amazon, a seemingly endless green carpet, stretches out in every conceivable direction. It's breathtaking, sure, but also the kind of place where, if you were to, say, accidentally tumble out of this fine aircraft without a parachute, a phone, or a really good understanding of which berries don't want to argue with your digestive system, you probably won't survive this. Let's be honest, most of us wouldn't last a day without Wi-Fi and a decent map, let alone in the actual, literal jungle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support really does help the channel keep chugging along, much like our hypothetical, slightly sputtering airplane. And hey, while you're at it, why not drop a comment letting us know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world? It's always fascinating to see how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The drone of the engine is a monotonous thrum, a perfect soundtrack for the vast, unchanging landscape unfurling beneath you. You're lulled by the endless green, the sheer, overwhelming scale of it all. It's a sea of trees, a world unto itself, and you feel impossibly small above it. The air inside the cabin is warm, thick with the scent of sun-baked upholstery and maybe a faint whiff of aviation fuel, just to keep things interesting. You peer out the small, scratched window, your eyes tracing the sinuous curves of a distant river, a silver ribbon woven through the emerald fabric. And then, you see it. Or rather, you see where the familiar green isn't. As you fly lower, perhaps following a newly cleared track for cattle ranching or a fresh scar from logging operations, the landscape begins to change. Patches of brown and ochre interrupt the viridian expanse, raw earth exposed like a wound. It's in these clearings, these stark, open spaces, that the first hints of something extraordinary begin to emerge. At first, you might dismiss it as an oddity of the deforestation itself, a trick of the light, perhaps, or the haphazard result of machinery. But as your eyes adjust, as your brain tries to process the unexpected, a pattern asserts itself. A line. Too straight. Too deliberate to be accidental. Then another, meeting it at a perfect right angle. You lean closer to the window, a quiet thrill, a nascent curiosity, beginning to bubble up through your drowsiness. There, etched into the ruddy soil, is a vast square, its sides hundreds of feet long. Nearby, a perfect circle, then another, sometimes concentric, sometimes linked by broad, straight avenues. These aren't random marks. They are designs, geometric and precise, as if the ancient earth itself decided to take up drafting. It's a startling juxtaposition, the wild, untamed jungle giving way to these stark, mathematical figures. For centuries, these enormous drawings were hidden, swallowed by the relentless growth of the rainforest, their existence a secret kept by the trees and the soil. A mainstream historical fact to tuck away as you drift off is that geoglyphs, by their very nature, are large-scale designs produced on the ground, often by painstakingly clearing vegetation or moving earth and stones, and their true forms are typically only discernible from a significant height or distance. Think of the famous Nazca lines in Peru. These Amazonian counterparts share the characteristic of demanding a broader perspective. The pilot, perhaps noticing your sudden interest, might bank the plane gently, giving you a wider view. More shapes appear, scattered across the denuded landscape like colossal, abstract art. Ditches and embankments form these patterns, some shallow, some impressively deep, hinting at an enormous investment of labor by people long vanished. You try to imagine the effort involved, the sheer human toil required to carve these figures, not with modern machinery, but with stone axes, wooden spades, and woven baskets. Who were these people? And why would they reshape the earth on such a grand scale, only for their work to be reclaimed by the very forest they had temporarily tamed? The scale is baffling. Some of these earthworks, these geoglyphs, as they're known in Brazil and zanjas, in Bolivia, can span areas equivalent to several city blocks. It's a humbling thought, the idea of entire civilizations rising and falling, leaving behind such enigmatic footprints. And here's a quirky little tidbit for you. When similar large-scale ground markings were first spotted by pilots in other remote parts of the world, sometimes decades ago, their reports were occasionally met with polite skepticism or outright dismissal. Colleagues or authorities might have brushed them off as fanciful tales, misinterpretations of natural geological formations, or even the result of unusual modern farming techniques. The concept of ancient peoples creating such monumental art or engineering in supposedly empty wilderness was, for some, simply too far-fetched to readily accept. It makes you wonder how many early glimpses of these Amazonian glyphs were initially overlooked or forgotten, simply because they didn't fit the prevailing narrative of what the ancient Amazon was like. You gaze down at a particularly intricate design, a square enclosure with rounded corners and multiple radiating lines, almost like a stylized sun. There's a strange beauty to it, a silent mathematics imposed upon the land. The questions begin to pile up, soft and persistent as the hum of the engine. Were these fortresses? Ceremonial gathering places? Astronomical calendars? Or something else entirely, something beyond our modern comprehension? The purpose of these clearings, and the ditches that define them, is a topic of much gentle debate. Indeed, archaeologists still debate whether the very first people to notice these from the air, perhaps local pilots or early surveyors, truly understood their antiquity or if they were initially mistaken for something much more recent, like forgotten colonial-era projects or even unusual natural depressions. The truth, as is often the case with such ancient mysteries, is likely complex and multifaceted, slowly being pieced together, fragment by fragment, from the clues left behind in the soil. For now, though, you just watch these ancient shapes slide by, a profound sense of wonder settling over you, as the vast, green mystery of the Amazon continues to guard its deepest secrets, even as some are laid bare beneath your wings. The initial surprise, that jolt of seeing deliberate geometry emerge from the wild earth, begins to settle into a deeper kind of awe as the landscape continues to unscroll beneath you. It's not just one or two of these enigmatic patterns you're witnessing. As your hypothetical small plane, still gamely buzzing through the warm air, traverses more of this cleared territory, you realize you're looking at a phenomenon of staggering proportions. More and more of these earthen etchings appear, some partially obscured by regenerating scrub, others starkly defined in freshly cleared pastureland. It's as if someone took a giant cookie-cutter set, albeit one designed by a very minimalist, very organized giant, and pressed it repeatedly into the surface of the Amazon. You begin to grasp that this isn't a localized curiosity, it's a widespread signature of a forgotten epoch. Imagine, for a moment, trying to count them. One here, a perfect square. Over there, a few miles on, a sprawling circular ditch. Then a pair of concentric rings, looking like a huge, earthy bullseye. You'd need a very, very long piece of cosmic string, and an even longer attention span, to connect the dots with all of them from this height. The sheer number is confounding. We're not talking about a handful of isolated sites. Hundreds have been catalogued, and that's a key mainstream fact to remember. Sophisticated remote sensing technologies like LiDAR, which can essentially peer through the dense tree canopy in areas not yet deforested, are revealing more of these hidden structures with astonishing regularity. It's like the Earth is slowly giving up its ancient secrets, one pixelated scan at a time. Each new discovery adds another piece to a puzzle that stretches across thousands of square kilometers, primarily in western Amazonian regions of Brazil, like the states of Acre and Rondônia, but also extending into parts of Bolivia and potentially beyond. This wasn't the work of a single village or a fleeting generation, it was a tradition, a way of marking the land, that persisted across a vast territory and, likely, over a considerable span of time. And it's not just the quantity that boggles the mind, but the sheer variety of forms. You see simple circles, some a modest 30 meters across, others colossal rings spanning hundreds of meters, large enough to comfortably swallow a modern football stadium, or perhaps several, if you're not too precious about the playing field. Then there are the squares and rectangles, their lines often uncannily straight, their corners impressively sharp, especially considering the presumed toolkit of their creators. These folks weren't just eyeballing it, they clearly had a plan, possibly even a dedicated geoglyph planning committee, which I imagine had very serious, lengthy debates, probably involving a lot of gesturing and pointing at sticks in the dirt, about the profound spiritual merits of a perfect 90-degree angle versus a slightly more relaxed 88 degrees. Some enclosures are U-shaped, opening out towards a particular direction, perhaps a river, or a significant point on the horizon. Others are more complex, combinations of circles and squares, or straight, parallel lines forming broad avenues that can run for hundreds of meters, sometimes connecting different enclosures, sometimes just stopping, as if leading to a destination no longer visible or understandable to us. The construction itself also varies. Some glyphs are defined by deep, wide ditches, the excavated earth piled into embankments either inside or outside the trench. Others are more subtle, perhaps shallower depressions or raised platforms. You might spot causeways or ramps leading into the enclosures, carefully constructed entry points. This diversity is part of what makes them such a profound enigma. If they were all identical circles, one might confidently guess a single, repeated purpose. But the variations suggest a more nuanced story, perhaps different functions, different symbolic meanings, or even the work of different cultural groups operating in the same general area over time. It's like they had different architectural apps for different needs, this one for big public ceremonies, that one for smaller, more exclusive gatherings, and another for, well, we're still trying to figure out that one part for many of them. This sprawling, varied network of earthen art, or infrastructure, or sacred graffiti, whatever it proves to be, lay largely unsuspected by the wider world until the late 20th century. Of course, local indigenous populations may have retained some knowledge or stories, but to the scientists and historians studying the Amazon, it was a revelation. It's a fascinating, and somewhat amusing, quirky tidbit that when mysterious, large-scale ancient constructions are discovered in various parts of the world, the initial, less scientific speculations can sometimes run wonderfully wild. Before rigorous archaeological investigation, you'd often hear imaginative attributions to all sorts of unlikely candidates, lost Roman legions, wandering Knights Templar, survivors of Atlantis, or naturally, the ever-reliable extraterrestrial landscapers. Thankfully, serious research has long since moved on to more grounded, though no less fascinating, theories about the actual indigenous creators of these Amazonian marvels. The sheer geographic spread of these sites, often found in clusters separated by miles of what was once, or still is, dense forest, prompts so many questions. How did these communities interact, if at all? Did they share a common set of beliefs that led them to create similar, yet distinct, patterns on the land? It's here that another layer of scholarly discussion unfolds. Archaeologists continue to explore whether the distinct regional clusters of geoglyph styles, say, the prevalence of square or rectangular forms in one area versus more circular or U-shaped designs in another, represent contemporaneous but culturally distinct groups operating with their own unique artistic or functional traditions, or perhaps an evolution of designs over several centuries within a more broadly connected, though diverse, cultural sphere. Were they trading partners, occasional rivals, or distant cousins sharing a deep ancestral heritage of land modification? The Earth holds these clues, but teases us with the full story. For now, from your vantage point, the patterns just keep coming, each one a silent question mark carved into the vast, green and brown tapestry below, a testament to a complex past that is only just beginning to be understood. As your mind continues to process the sheer scale and variety of these earthen patterns from your imaginary perch in the sky, a new understanding begins to dawn, gently nudging aside old, ingrained assumptions. For so long, the popular image of the pre-Columbian Amazon was that of a pristine wilderness, an untouched, virgin forest, vast and green and largely empty of significant human influence, save for a few scattered, small nomadic tribes. But these geoglyphs, these monumental earthworks, scream a very different story. They are silent, yet incredibly eloquent, witnesses to a landscape that was profoundly shaped and managed by human hands long before Europeans ever dreamed of a new world. The Amazon, it turns out, wasn't so much a virgin wilderness as perhaps a very experienced, very well-landscaped park that just let itself go a bit after the original groundskeepers, well, disappeared. You begin to picture the environment not just as a passive backdrop for these strange carvings, but as an active part of their story. The existence of hundreds of these large-scale structures, requiring coordinated labor and settled communities, directly challenges that old, empty jungle narrative. You can't build something that takes weeks or months, involving hundreds of people, if you're constantly on the move just trying to find your next meal. This implies agriculture, settled villages, and a sophisticated understanding of the local environment. And the evidence for this doesn't just lie in the ditches and embankments of the geoglyphs themselves, it's also found in the very soil. Let yourself sink into the idea of the earth itself holding memories. One of the most fascinating discoveries in Amazonian archaeology is something called terra preta do Indio, or Amazonian dark earths. This is your key mainstream historical fact for this part of our journey. Amazonian dark earths, or ADE, are incredibly fertile, black soils found in patches throughout the Amazon basin, often near archaeological sites. Unlike the typically poor, acidic soils of much of the surrounding rainforest, terra preta is rich in nutrients, organic matter, and crucial microorganisms. And here's the kicker, it's anthropogenic. It was made by people. For centuries, indigenous populations intentionally, or perhaps semi-intentionally, created these supersoils by incorporating charcoal from cooking fires and controlled burns, pottery shards, which help with aeration and water retention, by the way, animal bones, fish remains, and other organic waste into the earth. It's like ancient composting on an epic, landscape-altering scale. Your average backyard compost bin enthusiast, bless their cotton socks, has absolutely nothing on these folks. They were playing 4D chess with soil fertility while many other parts of the world were still figuring out basic agricultural checkers. Imagine sifting this soil through your fingers. It's dark, crumbly, and teeming with life, a stark contrast to the often reddish or yellowish, nutrient-poor clays nearby. These patches of enhanced earth allowed for sustained agriculture, supporting larger, more sedentary populations than previously thought possible in the Amazon. Entire villages, and perhaps even networks of villages, could thrive for generations thanks to these managed soils. And this brings us to a lively scholarly debate. Scientists are still intensely investigating the full extent to which these ancient populations intentionally created terra preta soils through systematic, deliberate additions aimed at soil improvement, versus it being a more accidental, though undoubtedly beneficial, byproduct of long-term village life, accumulated kitchen middens, and waste disposal practices. Was it conscious, advanced soil science, or a happy, long-term accident of settlement? The jury is still out, but either way, it points to a deep, enduring human presence and a significant impact on the ecosystem. Beyond the soil itself, there's growing evidence that pre-Columbian Amazonians actively managed the forest's composition. They didn't just clear random patches for their geoglyphs or settlements, they cultivated what are sometimes called forest gardens. They favored and planted useful tree species, Brazil nut trees, palms for fruit and construction materials, various fruit orchards, and medicinal plants, creating areas that were less wild jungle and more like extensive, diverse agroforestry systems. The distribution of certain plant species in the Amazon today still reflects these ancient patterns of human cultivation. They also likely used controlled fires to create more open, park-like landscapes or savannas in some regions, particularly areas where many geoglyphs are found. This wouldn't have been the dense, impenetrable jungle we often imagine, but a mosaic of cultivated fields, managed forests, open savannas, and, of course, the rivers and wetlands, all interconnected and utilized. You might even recall a quirky historical tidbit here. Some of the very first European explorers who braved the Amazon in the 16th century, like Francisco de Orellana, wrote astonishing accounts of what they saw. They described dense populations, large villages that stretched for miles along the riverbanks, sophisticated pottery, extensive road networks, and well-tended agricultural lands. For centuries, these chronicles were largely dismissed by historians as exaggerations, the fevered dreams of men lost in an unknown continent, or perhaps just tall tales to impress their sponsors back home. You can just imagine some poor Spanish chronicler, like Friar Gaspar de Carvajal who documented Orellana's journey, trying to explain that he saw veritable cities of thousands and roads cleared through the jungle, and his editor back in Seville just sighing, "Sure, Gaspar, and did you also see El Dorado, fountains of youth, and perhaps a manatee playing the lute?" Turns out Gaspar, and Orellana, might have been onto something significant, minus the lute-playing manatee, probably. Modern archaeology, with the discovery of terra preta, extensive earthworks like geoglyphs, raised fields for farming, and evidence of managed forests, is increasingly suggesting that those early, often disbelieved, reports might have captured a glimpse of the Amazonian world just before, or as, it was being devastated by diseases introduced from the Old World. The virgin forest, in many places, may actually be a relatively recent regrowth over a once much more populated and human-influenced landscape. The geoglyphs, then, are not just isolated oddities, but a powerful clue to this much richer, more complex human history hidden beneath the canopy. So, you're looking down, or perhaps now you're imagining yourself walking through this transformed Amazonian landscape, realizing it was a busy, managed world. The next obvious, gentle question that drifts into your mind is, who? Who were these people, these forgotten architects of earth and forest? It's a tantalizing question because, unlike the Romans or the ancient Egyptians, they didn't leave behind stone tablets carved with king lists or papyrus scrolls detailing their triumphs and tax codes. They didn't build in stone that would shout their names across millennia. Their messages are more subtle, written in the language of the land itself. It's like they threw this enormous, geometrically precise party across the Amazon, then forgot to sign the guest book. A bit inconsiderate, perhaps, but they did leave some truly fascinating earth sculptures as rather impressive, long-lasting party favors. Archaeologists are still piecing together their identities, sifting through the clues left behind in the soil. There isn't a single, catchy name for the geoglyph people that you can easily memorize. Instead, researchers often refer to them by the cultural traditions associated with the pottery styles found at their sites, or by the regions where their earthworks are concentrated. What we know for sure, as a mainstream historical fact, is that archaeological excavations at these geoglyph sites and the nearby areas where people clearly lived have unearthed a wealth of material culture, distinctive pottery shards, polished stone axe heads, grinding stones, and sometimes, if the acidic soil is kind, organic remains like charred seeds or animal bones. These artifacts help to date their activities, placing many of these remarkable constructions in a broad timeframe stretching roughly from around 2000 BCE up to about 1300 CE, although some sites may be older or younger. This wasn't a brief flash in the pan, it was a long, enduring tradition of shaping the world around them. Imagine, for a moment, stepping into one of their villages. The air is warm, carrying the scent of wood smoke from cooking fires and the damp, earthy smell of the surrounding forest, a forest that, as we've learned, was probably more of a productive garden than a wild tangle. The houses wouldn't be stone palaces, but likely sturdy structures made from timber poles, woven branches, and thatched roofs from palm fronds, materials that melt back into the earth relatively quickly. Yet, archaeologists can sometimes find the subtle traces, post holes arranged in circles or rectangles indicating where these homes once stood, or compacted earth floors. You might hear the rhythmic thud of a stone axe shaping wood, the chatter of voices in a language we no longer know, the laughter of children playing amongst the trees, perhaps chasing after brilliantly colored butterflies or a startled agouti. The sounds of daily life. The sheer scale and precision of the geoglyphs tell us something crucial about their societies. You don't just get a few hundred people, or even a few dozen, to dig massive, perfectly aligned ditches, sometimes hundreds of meters long, just for a bit of weekend recreation. There was planning. There had to be. There were probably discussions, agreements, and almost certainly someone, or some group, in charge saying, "No, no, move that marking stake a bit to the other left. My other left." This implies a level of social organization capable of mobilizing and coordinating labor for these large, communal projects. Whether this was a highly stratified society with powerful chiefs dictating terms, or perhaps groups of more egalitarian villages collaborating for shared ceremonial or practical purposes, is a fascinating area of ongoing research. Indeed, anthropologists and archaeologists are still actively debating the exact nature of the socio-political organization of these geoglyph-building societies. Were they complex chiefdoms with clear hierarchies and centralized authority, or were they perhaps collections of autonomous but allied villages that came together for specific, large-scale undertakings, driven by shared beliefs or mutual benefit? The pottery they left behind is particularly revealing. Archaeologists get incredibly, and endearingly, excited about tiny bits of broken pottery. To you or me, it might just look like a fragment of an old pot. To an archaeologist, it's like a partial Facebook profile from 2,000 years ago. The clay itself can sometimes be traced to specific source locations, telling us about movement or trade. The way the pot was made, the tempering materials mixed into the clay, the shape of the vessel, and any incised or painted decorations, these are all stylistic signatures that can link different sites together, suggest cultural connections, or show changes over time. Some pottery is plain and utilitarian, clearly for everyday cooking or storage. Other pieces are more elaborate, perhaps used in feasting or rituals that might have taken place within or near the geoglyphs. It's also worth noting a slightly quirky, and somewhat uncomfortable, historical tidbit regarding how an earlier generation of scholars sometimes approached monumental works in the Americas. In the absence of obvious written records like those from Europe or Asia, and sometimes driven by prevailing biases, there was a period where some Western researchers were reluctant to credit indigenous populations with creating sophisticated earthworks or complex societies. Instead, you'd find theories proposing lost tribes of Israelites, wandering Phoenicians, mythical Welsh princes, or other Old World visitors as the true builders. This unfortunate tendency largely ignored the deep history and ingenuity of the native peoples themselves. Thankfully, archaeology has long since moved past such colonialist fantasies, recognizing and celebrating the incredible achievements of the indigenous architects of the Americas, including those who etched these enigmatic patterns into the Amazonian soil. These were Amazonian people, born of that environment, their knowledge and traditions developed over countless generations in intimate connection with the rivers, the forests, and the very earth they chose to sculpt. They were the original pioneers, the original innovators of this unique, humid world. So, you have these enigmatic architects, these ancient Amazonians, clearly organized, clearly capable of monumental undertakings, and deeply connected to their transformed landscape. The question that naturally follows, hanging in the humid air like the scent of unseen blossoms, is, why? Why invest so much time, so much collective effort, into carving these vast geometric designs into the earth? What was the driving force behind these circles, squares, and avenues? While we can't simply ask them, one of the most compelling and widely discussed theories is that many of these geoglyphs served as sacred spaces, arenas for ritual, ceremony, and communal gathering. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of one of these immense enclosures as dusk begins to settle. The last rays of the sun paint the sky in hues of orange and violet, casting long, soft shadows from the surrounding, carefully managed forest. The air grows cooler, carrying the chirps and calls of nocturnal creatures beginning to stir. The geoglyph itself, perhaps a vast circle etched into the earth, feels strangely alive in the fading light. The ditches that define its perimeter seem deeper, the low embankments more pronounced. You might feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere as you step from the ordinary world outside into this specially demarcated zone. This sense of a defined, set-apart space is a key reason why the ceremonial theory holds such sway. A very mainstream historical fact supporting this is that archaeologists often note the remarkably clean interiors of many geoglyphs. Unlike typical village sites, which are usually littered with the debris of daily life, broken pottery, food remains, discarded tools, the inner sanctums of these earthworks often contain very few such artifacts. This suggests they weren't primarily places of everyday habitation or messy industrial activity. It's like they were very tidy hosts. Welcome to our enormous sacred circle. Please, wipe your feet before entering, and no leaving half-eaten taper bones or broken pots lying around after the cosmic alignment ceremony. Thank you very much. This cleanliness implies that these were areas reserved for specific, perhaps periodic, activities. What kind of activities? Picture a gathering. Perhaps the entire community, or maybe select representatives from surrounding villages, converge here at certain times of the year, the solstice, the equinox, or a time linked to planting or harvest cycles. You might hear the rhythmic pulse of wooden drums, the sound carrying far through the still night air. Chanting, perhaps, a collective voice rising and falling, weaving intricate patterns of sound that mirror the patterns on the earth. Dancers, their bodies adorned with feathers, seeds, and painted designs, might move in prescribed formations within the geometric boundaries, their feet stamping the earth in unison, a connection between the people, the land, and the cosmos. The shapes themselves could hold deep symbolic meaning, though decoding that symbolism without a written key is a gentle challenge. Circles often represent continuity, unity, the cosmos, or the cycle of life and seasons in many cultures. Squares might symbolize order, the four cardinal directions, or stability. The avenues or pathways that often connect enclosures or lead into them could have served as processional ways, guiding participants on a symbolic journey towards the sacred center. Imagine a slow procession of people, perhaps led by shamans or elders adorned in significant regalia, moving along one of these earthen corridors, anticipation building as they approached the main ceremonial space. Feasting, too, was likely a component of many ancient rituals, a way to solidify community bonds, honor spirits or ancestors, and redistribute resources. The effort of creating such a large, clear space would certainly make it an ideal spot for a communal get-together, a sort of ancient public plaza with a decidedly spiritual focus. Now, for a quirky, and decidedly less scientific, aside. Whenever humanity encounters grand, mysterious geometric forms from the ancient past, someone, somewhere, will inevitably link them to things like ley lines, vortices of telluric earth energy, or landing pads for extraterrestrial sky gods. The Amazonian geoglyphs have not entirely escaped such imaginative speculations, especially in more New Age or fringe archaeological circles. While the idea of these sites being precisely located nodes for harnessing cosmic power sounds wonderfully intriguing for a late-night chat, actual field archaeologists, the ones carefully excavating and measuring, tend to view these interpretations with a very, very healthy dose of academic skepticism, preferring to ground their theories in the tangible evidence found in, and around, the earthworks themselves. The debate amongst those serious researchers, however, is still wonderfully rich. While a ritualistic or ceremonial function is widely accepted as a primary purpose for many geoglyphs, scholars are still actively debating the specific nature of these ceremonies. Were they all for the same general purpose, just expressed in slightly different local styles? Or did the varied shapes, the circles, the squares, the U-forms, correspond to entirely different sacred purposes, different deities or spirits being invoked, or even different groups of participants? For example, were circular glyphs used for dances that celebrated the sun or moon, while square ones were for more formal councils or ancestral rites? Trying to reconstruct specific ancient rituals from just the earthworks is a bit like trying to figure out the plot of an entire, complex opera by only looking at the empty stage design and a few discarded props. You know something significant and probably quite dramatic happened there, but the precise libretto, the words and music, are largely lost to time. Were these events open to everyone, a sort of ancient Amazonian Woodstock or Glastonbury, but with better long-term landscape impact and fewer regrettable fashion choices lingering in photographs? Or were they more exclusive, perhaps restricted to initiated members of a society, shamans, or a ruling elite, with the main populace observing from the edges or not at all? The bouncers, if any existed at these earthen VIP lounges, unfortunately left no written records of their guest lists or door policies. What seems clear, though, is that these were spaces designed to impress, to focus attention, and to facilitate experiences that transcended the everyday. They were anchors in the landscape, powerful symbols of a community's beliefs, identity, and connection to their world. While the idea of these geoglyphs as sacred spaces, humming with the energy of ancient ceremonies, is incredibly compelling and widely supported, you might find your drowsy mind wandering, as minds often do, to other possibilities. Human endeavors, especially on such a grand scale, are rarely single-purpose. Could these earthen structures have served other roles, perhaps alongside or even instead of ritualistic ones? The forgotten architects were, after all, practical people, living complex lives in a world that demanded ingenuity. So, let's gently prod the edges of these other theories. Were they forts, fields, or perhaps even silent dialogues with the stars? Consider the idea of defense. Some of the geoglyphs feature quite substantial ditches and embankments. You could imagine warriors, adorned with fierce paint and armed with hardwood bows and stone-tipped arrows, patrolling these low walls, keeping watch over the approaches to their village or ceremonial center. The ditches themselves, sometimes several meters deep and wide, would certainly present an obstacle to any unwelcome visitors. However, for many of the glyphs, the defensive theory doesn't quite hold up to scrutiny. Entrances are often wide and seemingly unprotected. Many lack a reliable water source within their perimeters, which would be crucial during a siege. And some of the shapes, elegant circles, or complex U-forms, don't seem particularly designed for optimal tactical advantage. Some of these look about as militarily effective as a very large, geometrically pleasing, but ultimately quite porous, wet paper bag. Though, perhaps the sheer, undeniable effort of building one was enough to give potential lazy invaders pause. Look, they dug a giant perfect square with their bare hands and some sticks. They're clearly very committed, and possibly a bit unhinged. Let's go raid the next valley over, where the folks are less into monumental earth-moving projects. What about agriculture? We know these people were skilled farmers, transforming their environment with terra preta and forest gardens. Could the geoglyphs themselves have played a role in food production or resource management? It's unlikely they were used as fields inside the enclosures, given the clean interiors we talked about. But perhaps they served as symbolic boundaries for agricultural lands, markers of community territory, or even as sophisticated systems for water management or drainage in specific landscapes, though evidence for the latter is still somewhat elusive for most sites. Maybe the cleared area within and around a geoglyph, maintained for ceremonial purposes, also created a microclimate that benefited certain nearby cultivated plants or attracted specific game animals. It's a tangled web of possibilities, where ritual and practicality might have been closely interwoven. Then there's the allure of the cosmos. Imagine standing within one of these enclosures on a clear Amazonian night, far from any modern light pollution. The sky above would be a breathtaking tapestry of stars, the Milky Way a luminous river arcing overhead. It's hardly surprising that ancient peoples, living in such intimate connection with the natural world, would pay close attention to the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. And indeed, a key mainstream historical fact to ponder is that some researchers have proposed, and in certain cases found compelling evidence for, astronomical alignments in a number of geoglyphs. Features like the orientation of avenues, the position of entrances, or specific sight lines within the structures appear to align with significant celestial events, the points on the horizon where the sun rises or sets on the solstices or equinoxes, or perhaps the rising and setting points of prominent stars or constellations that held cultural importance. It's like they had their own giant, earthen observatories, perhaps less structurally complex than Stonehenge, but probably with much better weather for consistent stargazing and definitely fewer complaints about the prevailing damp. And, one imagines, a significantly higher chance of encountering a jaguar during your observations, which probably kept the solstice vigils quite lively and focused. These alignments could have helped them regulate calendars, predict seasonal changes crucial for agriculture, and schedule important rituals. Of course, the internet being the wonderfully weird place it is, you might stumble upon a more quirky, and certainly less substantiated, speculation, that some of these geometric clearings were actually ancient sports arenas. Imagine complex, ritualized games played out within these earthen boundaries, with rules and objectives now completely lost to us, sort of like an Amazonian version of the Mesoamerican ballgame, or perhaps a unique local sport involving impressive acrobatics and maybe a sacred rubber ball, or whatever the Amazonian equivalent might have been. It's a fun thought, a pre-Columbian Olympics with a very distinct architectural style, but concrete evidence for geoglyph games is, shall we say, not exactly piling up in the archaeological record. The truth is, many of these purposes aren't mutually exclusive. A site could have been primarily ceremonial, but its astronomical alignments added another layer of significance. A sacred space might also have been a symbol of a community's identity and territory. And this leads to another area of gentle, ongoing scholarly discussion, the debate around primary versus secondary functions. Could a site predominantly used for grand ceremonies also have served, on occasion, as a temporary place of refuge in times of intervillage conflict? Or did its overwhelming symbolic power and sacred character primarily define its role in the community, regardless of any other potential, occasional, or practical uses it might have been put to? Maybe they were the ancient equivalent of a multipurpose community center, grand shamanic rituals and celestial observations on a Saturday, intervillage feasts on a Sunday, and perhaps a bit of light defensive posturing or territorial flag waving on alternate Tuesdays if visitors were expected. You know, just keeping their options, and their earthen architecture, impressively open. The mystery continues to unfold, layer by fascinating layer. So, you're pondering these vast earthen shapes, their possible ceremonial gravitas, their potential links to the stars, or even their occasional, perhaps reluctant, role as a neighborhood fortress. But now, let a different kind of question gently surface in your sleepy thoughts. How? How on earth, quite literally, did they do it? How did these ancient Amazonians, with no metal tools, no beasts of burden like oxen or horses, and certainly no laser-guided earth-movers, manage to carve such enormous and often remarkably precise geometric designs into the challenging rainforest terrain? The sheer effort, the ingenuity involved, is a monumental story in itself. First, let your imagination conjure up the scene before construction even begins. You're standing in a dense part of the Amazon rainforest. Towering trees, some many feet thick, form a nearly continuous canopy far above, filtering the sunlight into a dim, greenish glow at ground level. The undergrowth is thick with vines, shrubs, and smaller trees, all competing for light and space. The air is heavy, humid, and alive with the sounds of insects, birds, and unseen creatures. Now, imagine being tasked with clearing a space here, not just for a small hut, but for an enclosure hundreds of meters across. They weren't exactly working with the latest chainsaws and forestry equipment. Their primary tools for felling trees were likely polished stone axes. Think about that for a moment, the rhythmic, percussive thud of stone on hardwood, hour after hour, day after day, to bring down even one of these giants. Fire might have been used too, carefully controlled to help clear underbrush or even to help fell larger trees by burning at their base. It would have been hot, smoky, arduous work, requiring immense patience and a great deal of collective muscle. Once a significant area was cleared, and remember, we're talking about spaces large enough that their true form is often best seen from the air, the next challenge was laying out the design. This is where their practical understanding of geometry truly shines, a key mainstream historical fact to appreciate. To achieve those impressively straight lines, some running for hundreds of meters, or those near-perfect circles and squares, they likely used simple but highly effective surveying techniques. Imagine them using long, taut cords made from braided plant fibers or vines, stretched between sighting posts, to mark out the lines. For circles, a central post with a long cord acting as a radius would allow them to trace a remarkably accurate circumference on the cleared ground. They might have had standardized units of measurement, perhaps based on body parts, like an arm's length or a stride, to ensure consistency and proportion in their designs. Getting a straight line with a bit of string in your backyard is one thing. Getting a straight line hundreds of meters long, through a partially cleared forest floor, with a bit of vine, while quite possibly fending off mosquitoes the size of small, very determined sparrows. That's a testament to serious dedication. Or maybe it just reflects a deeply ingrained cultural desire for things to be just so, a certain aesthetic satisfaction in well-ordered space. With the design marked out, the real heavy lifting began, digging the ditches and forming the embankments. The tools here were equally basic, yet effective in skilled hands. Hardwood digging sticks, perhaps fire-hardened at the tip, would have been used to loosen the soil. Stone hoes or spades, if they had them, evidence for these can be varied, or even large, strong shells could have helped. Then, the loosened earth had to be moved. This was likely done using woven baskets, filled laboriously by hand or with smaller wooden scoops, and then carried, basketful by basketful, to be dumped and shaped into the embankments. Picture lines of people, men and women, perhaps even older children, passing baskets along or carrying their own loads, a slow but steady process of excavation and construction. The sheer volume of earth moved for some of these larger geoglyphs is measured in thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, of cubic meters. It's a mind-boggling feat of human labor. This wasn't a weekend project for a few enthusiastic volunteers. The construction of a single geoglyph likely involved a significant portion of a community, or perhaps several allied communities, working together for weeks, months, or even longer. Researchers continue to explore the precise division of labor and the time frame for constructing individual geoglyphs. Were they built in relatively short, intensive bursts of activity by large, well-organized groups, perhaps during seasons when agricultural duties were lighter? Or were they perhaps gradually expanded and maintained over many generations, with each cohort adding their contribution to an ancestral monument, like a slow, earthen accretion of communal memory and effort? It's a quirky tidbit from the world of experimental archaeology that attempts have been made, on a much, much smaller scale of course, to replicate ancient earthwork construction using only replica prehistoric tools. These experiments consistently highlight two things: first, the incredible amount of time and sheer physical effort involved, and second, the surprising degree of skill, planning, and project management knowledge needed to do it effectively. It's much, much harder than it looks to dig a perfectly straight and evenly deep ditch with just a sharpened wooden stick and a basket, especially if you're trying to get it to meet up perfectly with another ditch at a precise 90-degree angle. You can just imagine the modern archaeologists after a single day of attempting to dig a mere 10-foot trench with replica tools. Okay, I have a newfound and profound respect for these ancient builders. Also, I believe I've pulled a muscle I didn't even know I possessed. And where, oh where, is the industrial-sized bottle of ibuprofen? The ingenuity of these forgotten architects was not just in their vision, but in their practical ability to transform that vision into enduring reality, using only what the earth and forest provided. You're there, in your mind's eye, witnessing this incredible scene of ancient industry, the felling of colossal trees, the marking of precise lines with simple cords, the endless parade of baskets filled with earth, all culminating in these monumental designs etched across the Amazonian floor. It's a picture of a vibrant, organized, and deeply purposeful society. And then, a quiet, almost inevitable question begins to form, a question that carries a touch of melancholy: what happened to them? Where did these ingenious architects, these carvers of the earth, go? Why did their voices fall silent, their great works eventually surrendering to the relentless embrace of the forest? The story of their decline and the subsequent dormancy of their earthen messages is a somber one, and it's tied, like so much of the history of the Americas, to events that began far across the ocean. The peak of geoglyph construction and the societies that built them was largely pre-Columbian, flourishing for centuries, perhaps even millennia, before the arrival of Europeans. While direct, sustained European contact in some of these specific inland Amazonian regions came later than in coastal areas. The devastating ripple effects often arrived much sooner. The primary, and most tragic, agent of change was disease. This is a stark mainstream historical fact. The arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1492, and the subsequent waves of European exploration, conquest, and colonization, unleashed what is often called the Great Dying. Old World diseases like smallpox, measles, influenza, and typhus, illnesses to which Europeans had developed some immunity over centuries, were entirely new to the indigenous populations of the Americas. They swept through communities with terrifying speed and lethality, causing a demographic collapse of catastrophic proportions across both continents. It's the ultimate uninvited guest scenario. Europeans showed up, and unfortunately, they brought some truly terrible, invisible, microscopic party crashers with them, pathogens which had a really bad habit of overstaying their welcome. By several centuries, in fact. Imagine these diseases, unseen and poorly understood, racing ahead of direct European presence, passed along indigenous trade routes, from village to village, deep into the heart of the continent. Populations that had thrived for generations, that had built these complex societies and monumental earthworks, were decimated. Some estimates suggest that upwards of 90% of the indigenous population of the Americas perished in the centuries following contact, though the exact figures are, of course, impossible to know with certainty. This loss of life would have shattered social structures, broken lines of tradition and knowledge, and left once thriving communities too small and too traumatized to maintain their large-scale agricultural systems, their complex settlements, and, indeed, their great earthen monuments. Beyond disease, the broader turmoil of colonization, warfare, enslavement, the forced displacement of peoples, and the disruption of ancient economic and political systems, would have further destabilized even those communities not immediately wiped out by sickness. Alliances crumbled, trade routes faltered, and the very fabric of their world began to unravel. It's a complex and heartbreaking tapestry, and historians and archaeologists continue to debate the precise speed and regional variations of this demographic collapse in different parts of the Amazon, and exactly how quickly, or slowly, the resilient rainforest began to reclaim areas that were once managed, cleared, or heavily populated. And so, as the people dwindled, their villages shrank or were abandoned, and the intricate knowledge systems that sustained their way of life fractured, the forest began its patient, inexorable return. You can picture it, a geoglyph, once a vibrant center of ceremony and community life, slowly falling quiet. The sounds of chanting and drumming fade, replaced by the whisper of the wind through encroaching grasses. Seeds, carried by birds or breeze, find purchase in the rich soil of the ditches and embankments. Saplings sprout, their roots probing the ancient earthworks. Over years, then decades, then centuries, the trees grow taller, their canopies spreading, knitting together to once again cloak the land in a dense green mantle. The sharp geometric lines of the circles and squares soften, their contours blurred by leaf litter and erosion, their forms gradually sinking back into the visual uniformity of the jungle. The jungle basically looked at these monumental efforts and said, "Oh, you appear to be finished with this rather large geometric earth sculpture and the accompanying civilization. Don't mind if I do." And then it proceeded to redecorate with its signature style, lots and lots of green. Everywhere, and with impressive speed. For hundreds of years, these incredible human achievements lay dormant, silent witnesses beneath the trees. Their existence might have faded into fragmented myths or legends among the surviving, resilient indigenous groups who adapted to new realities, or they might have been forgotten altogether by the wider world. It's a poignant thought, isn't it? All that effort, all that artistry and communal spirit, seemingly swallowed by the wilderness. There's a quirky kind of echo here with the many folk tales and legends from around the world about lost cities or hidden kingdoms engulfed by nature. Think of Percy Fawcett's search for the lost city of Z right there in the Amazon. While those tales are often highly romanticized and sometimes based on flimsy evidence, the reality of the Amazonian geoglyphs being genuinely hidden by forest regrowth for centuries is a true example of monumental human endeavors becoming temporarily lost to broader global knowledge. It's like these ancient architects left a massive, intricate voicemail message carved directly into the surface of the planet, put it on a sort of planetary, do not disturb mode for 500 years or so, and we're only just now, in relatively recent times, getting around to checking it, thanks in no small part to the very deforestation that now threatens them. Their silence is finally being broken, but the story they tell is one of both incredible achievement and profound loss. You've journeyed with these ancient architects as they carved their world, and you've stood by, in your imagination, as the forest tenderly, relentlessly, drew a green veil over their monumental works. For centuries, these earthen messages lay dormant, sleeping giants beneath a sea of trees, their stories whispered only to the roots and the rain. But secrets, especially those etched so profoundly into the land, have a way of eventually resurfacing. And so, we arrive at their modern reawakening, the sky-high revelations that brought them back into our collective awareness. The story of their rediscovery is, rather ironically, intertwined with a process that now poses one of the greatest threats to their continued existence, deforestation. Beginning notably in the latter half of the 20th century, particularly from the 1970s and 1980s onwards, large-scale clearing of the Amazon rainforest for cattle ranching, agriculture, road construction, and settlements began to accelerate. As vast swathes of ancient forest were felled, burned, and bulldozed, the land beneath was exposed on an unprecedented scale. And it's in these stark, open wounds in the earth that the geoglyphs began to reappear, like photographic images slowly developing in a tray. It's a bit like the Amazon decided to shed its dense green cloak, and everyone who happened to be looking down suddenly exclaimed, "Oh, my goodness. Look at those absolutely fascinating ancient tattoos you've been hiding under all that foliage for centuries." A rather destructive way to finally get noticed again, unfortunately, but noticed they were. From ground level, even in a cleared area, many of these geoglyphs can be surprisingly difficult to discern. Their relief is often quite shallow, ditches might only be a meter or two deep, embankments similarly low, especially after centuries of erosion and infill. You could be standing right in the middle of a vast circular enclosure and not fully appreciate its shape or scale. But from the air, everything changes. This is the key mainstream historical fact about their re-emergence, the modern rediscovery, and the systematic documentation of these Amazonian earthworks were hugely dependent on aerial perspectives. Imagine being a pilot in the 1970s, flying a small plane on a survey mission or transporting goods over a recently deforested tract of land in, say, Acre, Brazil. You'd be expecting to see the usual scars of development, raw earth, maybe some lonely, charred tree trunks, the beginnings of pasture. And then, suddenly, your eye catches it, a perfect square. A vast circle. A set of parallel lines, too straight, too deliberate to be natural. You'd probably blink, rub your eyes, and perhaps discreetly check if someone had accidentally spiked your in-flight coffee with something a bit more whimsical. Early reports from such keen-eyed pilots and surveyors were crucial. Local ranchers or farmers clearing land also sometimes noticed these strange, recurring patterns in the soil, though their significance might not have been immediately apparent. It took dedicated researchers, archaeologists like Andimar Dias and later Alcir Ranzi in Brazil, to begin systematically investigating these reports, visiting the sites, and recognizing them for what they were, evidence of sophisticated, large-scale, Pre-Columbian societies. At first, there might have been skepticism, the prevailing image of the empty Amazon being hard to shake. But as more and more sites were documented, often with the help of aerial photographs, the sheer extent of this ancient phenomenon began to dawn on the scientific community. It was a paradigm shift in understanding Amazonian history. And here's a quirky little tidbit about such discoveries. It's not uncommon for significant archaeological sites to be found somewhat by accident by people looking for something else entirely. Globally, there are stories of prospectors searching for oil or minerals, or engineers surveying routes for new highways or pipelines, whose trained eyes for landscape anomalies, subtle depressions, unusual vegetation patterns, or unexpected soil discolorations, led them to stumble upon ancient settlements or earthworks that had been overlooked for generations. Their aha moment was perhaps less about historical curiosity and more about, that's odd and not on my geological map, but it often led to the right experts being called in. The advent of satellite imagery further revolutionized the search, allowing researchers to scan vast, remote areas from their computer screens, spotting potential geoglyph sites that would have been incredibly difficult and expensive to find through ground surveys alone. And more recently, as we touched upon earlier, technologies like LiDAR, light detection and ranging, have become game changers. LiDAR can be flown over still forested areas, and its laser pulses can penetrate the tree canopy, mapping the ground surface beneath with incredible precision. It's basically like giving archaeologists X-ray vision to see through trees. It's perhaps less Superman leaping tall buildings and more super-nerd meticulously analyzing point cloud data, but it's incredibly cool and vastly more useful for finding ancient, hidden stuff than attempting any acrobatic feats in spandex. Thanks to LiDAR, geoglyphs are now being found even in areas still covered by dense forest, revealing that what we've seen in deforested zones might only be a fraction of what's truly out there. Of course, this rediscovery by the academic and wider world brings up an important point, which is still a subject of gentle, ongoing discussion: the extent to which local, non-academic populations in the Amazon region, particularly indigenous communities whose ancestors may have had connections to these sites, may have retained their own knowledge or oral traditions about some of these geoglyphs prior to their official, scientific documentation. Integrating this local and traditional knowledge respectfully and ethically with archaeological research is a crucial aspect of understanding the full story of these incredible places. The sky-high revelations continue, not just from satellites and airplanes, but also, hopefully, from the voices on the ground. The story of these sky-high revelations, of LiDAR peeling back the green skin of the forest to show us these ancient scars of human endeavor, is captivating. But now, let your mind drift back once more, away from the satellites and survey planes, back to a time when these earthen forms were not dormant mysteries, but vibrant parts of a living world. What was it like, you might wonder, to live alongside these monumental creations? What were the daily rhythms, the beliefs, the social connections of the people whose hands shaped them? Imagine yourself waking with the first light, a soft, diffused glow filtering through the thatch of your communal longhouse or your smaller family dwelling. The air is already warm, carrying the familiar sense of damp earth, the embers of last night's fire, and perhaps the distant aroma of someone already preparing the morning meal. The sounds are those of a waking village, the soft murmur of voices, the crow of a forest bird serving as a natural alarm clock, the gentle thud of a pestle as someone begins to process manioc root. You stretch, your bed a woven mat or a hammock slung between sturdy wooden posts, the same posts that support the roof that keeps the rain, and most of the nocturnal creepy crawlies, out. Daily life, for these forgotten architects, was intimately tied to the rhythms of the forest and the rivers. A crucial mainstream historical fact to remember is that their diet was surprisingly diverse and sophisticated, far from the stereotype of struggling hunter-gatherers. They were skilled agriculturalists, cultivating their rich terra preta soils with crops like bitter and sweet manioc, cassava, which was a staple, processed to remove toxins and made into flour or flatbreads. Maize, sweet potatoes, beans, squash, and peppers would also have graced their fields, often intercropped in a way that mimicked the diversity of the natural forest. Fishing in the abundant rivers and lakes provided a vital source of protein. Picture them using nets, traps, or perhaps bows and arrows to catch a variety of fish. Hunting in the surrounding forest, for game like tapirs, peccaries, monkeys, or capybaras, would supplement their diet, as would the gathering of wild fruits, nuts, like the Brazil nut we still enjoy today, palm hearts, and medicinal plants, a veritable pharmacy provided by the forest. You can just imagine the kids' chore list for the day. Okay, Tanny, you help your mother grate the manioc and tend the smoke fire. Hey Pan, you go check the fish traps with your uncle. And someone, please, for the love of the great forest spirit, could you sweep out the main ceremonial plaza before the elders arrive for the afternoon deliberations? It looks like a capybara convention partied there all night. Their social fabric was likely woven from strong kinship ties, with families and extended families forming the core of village life. Cooperation would have been essential, not just for monumental tasks like building geoglyphs, but for everyday survival and prosperity, clearing fields, building houses, processing food, and raising children. Anthropologists continue to explore the degree to which the social structures of these geoglyph-building societies were strictly hierarchical, perhaps with powerful chiefs or shamans at the top, versus more hierarchical or egalitarian systems, where leadership roles, whether for overseeing rituals, leading a hunting party, or coordinating communal construction projects, were perhaps more fluid, situational, or determined by consensus and personal prestige. Their spiritual world, we can surmise, was rich and deeply intertwined with the natural environment. They likely held an animistic worldview, seeing spirits and vital forces in the animals, the plants, the rivers, the very earth itself. Shamans, or spiritual specialists, would have played a crucial role, mediating between the human community and this spirit world, conducting rituals for healing, for successful hunts, for bountiful harvests, or to appease powerful entities. It's a quirky tidbit that some early ethnographers, when they did encounter more remote Amazonian groups, reported surprisingly complex indigenous understandings of astronomy and intricate mythologies tied to constellations and celestial events. This deep celestial knowledge, passed down through oral tradition, might well have informed the orientation or purpose of some of the geoglyphs, linking the earthworks below with the grand cosmic patterns above. Their spiritual life was probably filled with fascinating beings, complex narratives, and profound connections, perhaps a lot more engaging than our modern human tendency to argue about Wi-Fi passwords, which often feels like our primary way of communing with unseen, and frequently uncooperative, powers. And what of the geoglyphs themselves in this daily tapestry? When not being used for a major ceremony, how did they feature in the everyday consciousness of the people? Imagine children playing near the edges of a vast, circular ditch, its form as familiar to them as the trees of the surrounding forest. Perhaps women cultivated kitchen gardens in the fertile soil just outside an enclosure, the imposing earthwork a silent, watchful presence. Maybe young men and women met there in the evenings, under the stars, the ancient geometry framing their whispered conversations. Having a giant, perfectly formed earthwork just down the path from your home must have been quite something. It certainly beats your neighbor's collection of slightly wonky garden gnomes or an overly enthusiastic display of plastic flamingos as a defining local landmark. These structures were likely constant, powerful reminders of their community's identity, their connection to their ancestors, their place in the cosmos, and the shared beliefs that bound them together. They weren't just abstract art, they were woven into the very fabric of life and landscape. You've walked, in your mind, through the daily lives of these ancient people, felt the rhythms of their existence, and pondered the beliefs that might have animated their world and their magnificent earthen forms. Now, let's zoom out a little, to see not just the geoglyphs or the villages, but the broader canvas of the Amazonian environment that these people actively painted with their presence. It's becoming clearer and clearer that these weren't isolated geometric islands in a sea of untouched, virgin jungle. Instead, the geoglyphs were often focal points within a significantly altered, carefully managed, and surprisingly diverse landscape, a true mosaic created by human hands and ingenuity working in concert with nature. So, the ancient Amazon, particularly in the regions where these earthworks are concentrated, wasn't just one endless, monotonous green carpet stretching from horizon to horizon. It was more akin to a very elaborate, very large, and very old quilt, stitched together with patches of dense, older-growth forest, interspersed with carefully tended forest gardens, open agricultural fields flourishing on rich terra preta soil, and even stretches of savanna or park-like grassland. And, of course, woven into this pattern were the clearings for the geoglyphs themselves, those special geometric cutouts reserved for ceremonies, gatherings, or whatever other profound purposes they served. This idea of a mosaic landscape is a crucial shift from older notions of a pristine, untamable wilderness. A key tool in creating and maintaining this mosaic was likely fire. Now, when we hear fire in the Amazon today, we rightly think of destructive, uncontrolled wildfires often linked to modern deforestation. But for ancient Amazonians, fire, when used with skill and knowledge, was a powerful and transformative tool. They likely used controlled burns to clear undergrowth, to create open areas for settlement or agriculture, and perhaps to encourage the growth of certain fire-adapted plant species or to attract game animals to newly sprouted vegetation. This is a significant mainstream historical fact. Paleoecological studies, which involve analyzing ancient pollen grains and charcoal deposits preserved in lake sediments and soils, indicate that many areas of the Amazon, especially those where geoglyphs are found, were not continuously dense rainforest in pre-Columbian times. Instead, these records show a dynamic history of vegetation change, with periods of more open savanna or parkland environments, often correlated with increased charcoal, suggesting sophisticated and long-term human use of fire to shape the landscape. These folks were using fire with a level of precision and understanding that would make your average modern camper, the one who always seems to manage to either incinerate the marshmallows into inedible charcoal briquettes or, worse, accidentally set the entire campsite mildly ablaze, look like a complete and utter rank amateur. The ancient Amazonians were fire whisperers, landscape sculptors using controlled flames. Beyond the clearings and the possible savannas, imagine wandering into their forest gardens. These weren't just random patches of forest left standing, but more like extensive, perennial agroforestry systems. They understood which trees were most valuable, for food, medicine, construction, or tools, and they actively cultivated them. Stands of Brazil nut trees, which are still a vital forest product today, were likely managed and encouraged. Various species of palms, providing everything from edible hearts and fruits to durable fibers for weaving and thatch for roofing, would have been essential components of these cultivated forests. Fruit trees, like cacao, the source of chocolate, a truly divine gift from the ancient Americas, Inga, soursop, and countless others, would have been planted and tended, creating a productive and diverse environment that was far more useful to human communities than a random patch of dense, untended jungle. It was a landscape designed for abundance. It's a quirky historical tidbit that some of the first European naturalists and explorers who ventured into less disturbed parts of South America in the 18th and 19th centuries were sometimes utterly astonished by what they described as park-like landscapes. They'd find areas with large, mature trees spaced out beautifully, with grassy undergrowth, almost like a nobleman's landscaped estate back in Europe. Often, they mistook these for purely natural formations, not realizing that they were looking at the long-term results of indigenous land management practices, the subtle but powerful signature of human cultivation and care, perhaps even the legacy of these geoglyph builders or their descendants. The term, pristine wilderness, when applied to places like the Amazon that have been inhabited for millennia, is often just another way of saying a place where we, the later arrivals, haven't yet fully appreciated how incredibly clever and influential the previous tenants were at landscaping before they got a really, really bad eviction notice from history. The creation of this mosaic landscape, the interplay of closed forest, open clearings, cultivated areas, and perhaps grasslands, would have had complex ecological effects. Scientists are still actively researching the long-term ecological consequences and sustainability of these ancient Amazonian land management systems. For example, did these practices actually increase local biodiversity in some instances by creating more varied habitats and edge effects where different ecosystems meet? Or did the focus on useful species lead to a reduction in other types of flora and fauna? The answers are likely complex and varied from region to region, but there's a growing appreciation for the sophisticated ecological knowledge these ancient people possessed. There's even a hope that understanding their ancient agroforestry techniques and their sustainable use of resources like terra preta might offer valuable lessons for contemporary sustainable development and conservation efforts in the Amazon basin today. It's a powerful reminder that humans can be, and have been, active, constructive shapers of their environment, not just destructive forces. These altered Amazonian canvases are a testament to that long, and often overlooked, history. You've journeyed through the imagined daily lives of the geoglyph builders and seen the incredible mosaic landscape they cultivated, a testament to their deep understanding of the Amazonian world. But how, you might wonder, do we know all this, or at least, how do we form such educated guesses about peoples who left no written confessions of their landscaping secrets? How do modern scientists, those detectives of deep time, actually go about decoding these ancient earthen messages and reconstructing the world that created them? It's a fascinating blend of muddy boots and high-tech wizardry. Of course, there's the traditional image of archaeology, the careful, patient excavation with trowels and brushes, sifting earth for tiny artifacts, painstakingly mapping features in the ground. This on-the-ground work is still absolutely vital. Digging small, carefully chosen test pits within or near geoglyphs can reveal those crucial pottery shards we talked about, stone tools, charcoal from ancient fires for radiocarbon dating, and even, sometimes, the faint traces of post holes where wooden structures once stood. But for understanding phenomena as vast and often as hidden as the Amazonian geoglyphs and their surrounding landscapes, archaeologists today have a much wider, and frankly, cooler, toolkit. Let's start with seeing the unseen from above. We've already touched upon how aerial photography and satellite imagery were game changers for the initial rediscovery. But the real superstar of recent Amazonian archaeology, a truly revolutionary mainstream historical fact, is LiDAR, light detection and ranging. Imagine an airplane or a drone flying over the densest, most impenetrable part of the rainforest. LiDAR fires down millions of laser pulses per second. Most hit the leaves and branches of the canopy, but a crucial fraction make it all the way to the forest floor and bounce back. By measuring the time it takes for these pulses to return, computers can create incredibly detailed 3D maps of the actual ground surface, effectively stripping away the vegetation. It's like the archaeologists have finally gotten their hands on the reveal map cheat code for the Amazon. Suddenly, boop, there's a previously unknown ancient village. Boop, another perfectly circular geoglyph, or a whole network of ancient pathways. It's almost unfair to the earlier generations of researchers who had to do it all with muddy boots, machetes, and a compass that probably got stuck pointing at a particularly magnetic taper if they weren't careful. LiDAR has revealed hundreds, if not thousands, of previously unknown earthworks, revolutionizing our understanding of the scale and complexity of pre-Columbian Amazonian societies. Once a site is identified, archaeologists might employ geophysical survey techniques before they even think about digging. Instruments like magnetometers can detect subtle variations in the Earth's magnetic field caused by buried features like hearths or ditches. Ground-penetrating radar, GPR, sends radio waves into the ground and reads the reflections to create images of what's beneath the surface. These methods can help create a map of buried features, allowing for much more targeted and less destructive excavations. Then there's the dirt itself. Archaeologists get really into dirt. They can look at a handful of soil and, with the help of specialist colleagues, tell you an astonishing amount about the past. We've talked about terra preta, those anthropogenic dark earths. Soil scientists analyze its chemical composition, its organic content, the tiny fragments of pottery and bone within it, to understand how it was formed and what it tells us about ancient diets and waste management. From soil cores drilled deep into the ground, paleobotanists can extract ancient pollen grains and phytoliths, microscopic silica bodies from plants, to reconstruct what kinds of vegetation were growing in an area thousands of years ago, revealing whether it was dense forest, savanna, or cultivated fields. It's a special kind of magic, really, mostly involving powerful microscopes, a lot of meticulous counting, and an impressive amount of patience. Dating these sites is, of course, crucial. Radiocarbon dating, which measures the decay of carbon-14 in organic materials like charcoal from a cooking fire, a wooden post, or even a bone, is a cornerstone. It can tell you roughly when that tree was burned or that animal died. Another clever technique is optically stimulated luminescence, OSL, dating. OSL can determine when a grain of sand or silt in a soil layer was last exposed to sunlight. So, if you take a sample from the bottom of a ditch that formed a geoglyph, OSL can tell you when that ditch was likely dug, and the sediment at its base was suddenly plunged into darkness. Now, for a slightly quirky, yet important, tidbit, sometimes, amidst all this high-tech gadgetry, the most effective detection system can be remarkably low-tech. Observant local people, farmers tilling their fields, indigenous forest guides who know their ancestral lands like the back of their hand, even cattle ranchers riding their pastures, occasionally lead archaeologists to previously unknown sites. They might have noticed subtle depressions in the ground that only appear after a particular rain, or unusual patterns in vegetation growth, or a spot where their plow consistently turns up old pottery shards. This deep, experiential local knowledge, built up over years or generations of living in an area, can be an invaluable resource, a testament to the power of simply paying close attention to the world around you. Of course, gathering all this data from LiDAR scans, soil samples, and carbon dating is one thing. Making coherent sense of it all is the real challenge. This brings us to an ongoing discussion and a significant hurdle in Amazonian archaeology: how to best integrate the massive datasets generated by these amazing new technologies with the equally vital, fine-grained details obtained from traditional, on-the-ground excavation and survey methods. The goal is to create a holistic and nuanced understanding of these ancient societies, ensuring that the big picture from the sky doesn't overshadow or inadvertently erase the vital human stories found in individual artifacts, specific household layouts, or unique local adaptations. It's like being given a million-piece jigsaw puzzle, where half the pieces are invisible to the naked eye, a quarter are written in a language you're still deciphering, and there's definitely no picture on the box to guide you. But hey, no pressure on the archaeologists, right? They just keep sifting, scanning, and slowly, painstakingly, decoding that ancient ground. You've peered into the archaeologist's toolkit, seen how they use everything from laser beams shot from airplanes to the careful analysis of ancient pollen grains to bring the story of these geoglyph builders to light. Now, let's gently zoom our focus, like adjusting a camera lens, to a specific region where this story has unfolded with particular richness and clarity, the state of Acre, in the southwestern corner of the Brazilian Amazon, nestled up against the borders of Peru and Bolivia. Acre is, in many ways, the heartland of geoglyph research, a place where hundreds of these enigmatic earthworks have left their enduring signature on the land. It's a veritable open-air museum of ancient geometric artistry. Imagine yourself flying over Acre, or perhaps even just poring over detailed satellite maps of the region. The landscape, where it has been cleared for cattle ranching, which is, sadly, a great deal of it, reveals an astonishing concentration of these ancient designs. Acre has so many geoglyphs, it's almost as if the ancient inhabitants were engaged in some kind of friendly, centuries-long cosmic competition for the title of most enthusiastic and prolific earth doodlers. And honestly, based on the evidence, they'd be very strong contenders for the gold medal, or perhaps a very large, symbolically significant carved wooden plaque. This region was one of the first where the sheer density and variety of these structures became apparent to modern researchers, turning it into a natural laboratory for studying this lost civilization. The diversity of forms in Acre is particularly striking. You'll see those perfect circles, some solitary, others in pairs or concentric sets. There are vast squares, often with curiously rounded corners, giving them a softer, almost squircle-like appearance. Rectangles, too, some long and narrow, others broad and imposing. And then there are the more unusual U-shaped enclosures, and complex composite figures where circles are attached to squares by broad avenues, or multiple enclosures are linked together in intricate patterns. Their sizes vary enormously, from modest structures perhaps 50 meters across to truly monumental works spanning several hundred meters. This sheer variety, all found within a relatively concentrated geographical area, hints at a vibrant, evolving cultural tradition, or perhaps several closely related traditions, all expressing themselves through this shared language of earth and architecture. A key mainstream historical fact about this region is that the geoglyphs of Acre predominantly date from the early centuries CE, roughly from around the year 1, up to about 1250 or 1300 CE. This tells us that this wasn't just a fleeting fad, but a deeply ingrained practice that persisted for well over 1,000 years, a remarkable continuity of cultural expression and communal effort. Archaeological work in Acre, pioneered by figures like Al-Suranzi, has confirmed many of the patterns we've discussed. The interiors of most glyphs are largely free of everyday habitation debris, strengthening the theory of their primary use as ceremonial or public gathering spaces. And almost invariably, nearby these clean ceremonial centers, you find the richer, darker soils of terra preta and the remains of what were once villages, the actual living spaces of the people who built and used these magnificent earthworks. It's one of the great, and rather painful, ironies of Amazonian archaeology that many of these sites in Acre came to light precisely because the forest that protected them for so long was being cleared. The good news for science was the sudden revelation of hundreds of these amazing ancient structures. The bad news was the context. This revelation was often a direct consequence of the rainforest rapidly being converted into cow pasture. So, it's a discovery tinged with a deep sense of concern for the preservation of not only these sites but also the remaining forest itself. Some geoglyphs are remarkably well preserved, their ditches and embankments still clearly defined even after centuries of neglect and then the sudden shock of deforestation. Others are more degraded, eroded by weather, or damaged by agricultural activity. Let's try to picture one of these Acre sites. Imagine standing on the reddish earth, typical of this region, at the edge of a large, square geoglyph. The sun is hot, the air thick. In the distance, you might hear the lowing of cattle, a modern sound intruding upon this ancient scene. The enclosure before you is vast, its low embankments, perhaps a meter or two high, stretching out for 200 meters on each side. There's an opening, a gateway, on one side, and from it, a broad, straight avenue, also defined by ditches and banks, leads off towards another, smaller circular enclosure a few hundred meters away. You walk along this avenue, the ground slightly raised, feeling the subtle sense of guided movement, of procession. The sheer scale, even from ground level, is impressive. You try to imagine it bustling with people during a ceremony, or hushed and empty, a silent monument under the stars. When these acre geoglyphs first started making international headlines, it's a quirky tidbit that some popular media articles, eager for a catchy headline, sensationally dubbed them the Amazon's Nazca Lines, or even trumpeted the discovery of lost cities of the Amazon. While these comparisons certainly help to grab public attention, they also sometimes oversimplified the unique characteristics and specific cultural context of these particular Amazonian earthworks, which have their own distinct story to tell, different from the desert drawings of Peru or the stone cities of Mesoamerica. The intense study in acre has also fueled fascinating scholarly debates. For instance, researchers are still intensely discussing the specific relationships and the chronological sequencing between all those different geometric forms. Did the circular designs, for example, generally precede the square ones, representing an earlier phase of the tradition? Or were circles, squares, and U-shapes largely contemporaneous expressions, perhaps serving different specific functions, or maybe even being the hallmarks of different but related social groups or clans coexisting in the region? Trying to understand all the subtle variations in shapes, sizes, and orientations of the geoglyphs in acre is a bit like trying to learn a complex new language where all the nouns and verbs are giant geometric patterns meticulously dug into the ground. Okay, you might imagine an archaeologist musing, so a big isolated circle seems to mean major sacred party location, but what does a square with an attached U-shape and two radiating avenues translate to? An even more advanced sacred party with breakout sessions and possibly designated celestial viewing areas? The earth holds the grammar, but we're still diligently working on the dictionary. You've explored the remarkable concentration of geoglyphs in Acre, Brazil, a testament to a vibrant, enduring culture that literally shaped its world. But now, let your perspective widen once more, like a bird soaring higher and higher above the Amazonian canopy. Were these communities in Acre, with their passion for earthen geometry, isolated islands of activity? Or were they part of a much larger conversation, a network of whispers across the jungles, connecting them to other peoples and other places across the vastness of the basin? The evidence, subtle but persistent, suggests the latter, a world far more interconnected than we once imagined. While Acre is indeed a hotspot, geoglyphs and other significant earthworks are not confined there. Similar, though often stylistically distinct, structures have been found in other parts of Brazil, in Rondônia, Amazonas state, even stretching towards Mato Grosso, and importantly, in neighboring Bolivia, particularly in the Llanos de Mojos region, which boasts its own incredible array of ancient causeways, canals, raised fields, and mounds. The sheer geographic spread of this earth-moving impulse, this desire to impress monumental designs upon the landscape, hints that these weren't just localized inventions, but perhaps part of a broader cultural phenomenon, an idea, or a set of practices that traveled. How would such connections have worked in a world without email, highways, or even horses? The answer, in large part, lies in the Amazon's magnificent circulatory system, its rivers. The Amazon River itself, along with its thousands of tributaries, formed natural highways, facilitating travel, trade, and the exchange of ideas over astonishing distances. Imagine sleek dugout canoes, expertly paddled, laden with goods and people, navigating these watery corridors. These weren't just short trips to the next village, there's compelling archaeological evidence for long-distance exchange. This is a key mainstream historical fact: the distribution of distinctive pottery styles, certain types of polished stone axes made from materials found only in specific locations, or even shells and other ornaments from distant coastal or Andean regions, all point to extensive regional and even trans-Amazonian trade networks operating for millennia before European arrival. Forget dial-up or even fiber optics, these folks had their own highly effective Amazon Connect, probably involving a lot more paddling, some very well-worn footpaths between river systems, and the exchange of actual, tangible goods instead of just digital likes and ephemeral emojis. Though, one imagines that a particularly well-crafted pot or a stunning feather headdress from a distant land might have been the ancient equivalent of going viral and getting 1,000 likes. What kind of goods were moving along these networks? Perhaps essential resources like salt, which is scarce in many parts of the interior Amazon. Specialized stone for tools, like high-quality chert or greenstone for ceremonial axes, might have been traded from areas where it was quarried. Beautifully decorated pottery, carrying not just the vessel itself but also the artistic styles and perhaps the symbolic meanings embedded in its designs, could travel far. Medicinal plants, potent psychoactive snuffs used in shamanic rituals, vibrant parrot feathers for ceremonial adornment, and even knowledge itself, songs, stories, ritual practices, and perhaps architectural ideas like how to lay out a really impressive geometric earthwork, could have flowed along these ancient routes. You can almost picture the ancient Amazonian equivalent of a traveling influencer or a highly respected artisan. Hey everyone, just got back from a long canoe trip down the Madeira River, and you have to check out this amazing new incised pottery style from the folks near the Big Rapids. And they showed me this incredible technique for making black earth even blacker. Use my special Envoy discount code, Anaconda15, when you trade your Brazil nuts. Limited availability, high demand. The existence of these networks makes it plausible that the idea of constructing geoglyphs, or certain stylistic elements of them, could have spread from one region to another. This doesn't necessarily mean that everyone was part of a single, unified geoglyph culture, or a monolithic empire. It's more likely a complex web of interactions. Perhaps different groups adopted and adapted the practice to suit their own local beliefs and needs. Maybe certain designs or ritual concepts became fashionable or prestigious and were emulated by neighboring communities. It's a quirky, and often tantalizing, tidbit for those who love to ponder deep historical connections that you sometimes find intriguing stylistic similarities between certain Amazonian artistic motifs or earthwork patterns, things like spirals, stepped frets, or specific anthropomorphic or zoomorphic figures that occasionally appear in geoglyph-associated art, and designs found in the art of Andean civilizations, or even further afield in Central or North America. Trying to trace these threads of possible ancient cultural diffusion is a fiendishly complex task, full of potential pitfalls and a lot of maybes. But finding a similar complex spiral pattern on a piece of pottery from a deep Amazonian site and then seeing a comparable motif carved into a stone monument hundreds or even thousands of miles away in a completely different environmental setting is like finding out that two of your very distant, long-lost cousins, who you were sure had never met or even heard of each other, independently developed an identical and very specific obsession with, say, competitive topiary or interpretive yodeling. It makes you go, is there a common ancestral yodeling gene here, or a secret transcontinental topiary newsletter we don't know about? Of course, the exact nature and intensity of these interregional connections form a lively arena for scholarly debate. Archaeologists are actively investigating whether these networks were primarily driven by the pragmatic exchange of essential resources, the powerful spread of influential religious ideologies and their associated ritual practices, or perhaps even by the actual migration of peoples who carried their traditions with them. And how did these interactions ultimately shape the development, the diversity, and eventually, the decline of these remarkable geoglyph building traditions across the vast Amazon basin? The whispers across the jungles are faint now, carried on the winds of centuries, but archaeologists, with their patient sifting and listening, are slowly learning to amplify their echoes. We've journeyed far tonight, haven't we? From those first glimpses of strange geometric shapes appearing in the cleared forests, through the lives and landscapes of their forgotten architects, to the modern scientific quest to understand their meaning. We've seen whispers of connection stretching across the vast Amazonian jungles, hints of a world far more complex and interconnected than previously dreamed. And now, as our journey nears its gentle close, we reflect on these timeless earthen messages, these silent witnesses, and what their enduring legacy might teach us, especially about human resilience and our own place in the long, winding story of this planet. The most profound mainstream historical fact that these geoglyphs, alongside the discovery of terra preta soils and extensive managed landscapes, have gifted us is a fundamental rewriting of Amazonian history. The long-held image of the Pre-Columbian Amazon as a largely untouched, virgin wilderness, sparsely inhabited by small, isolated, nomadic tribes, has been definitively overturned. In its place, we now see a vibrant tapestry of complex, settled societies, skilled engineers and farmers, who actively shaped their environment, supported substantial populations, and left behind monumental testaments to their ingenuity, their beliefs, and their communal spirit. They weren't just surviving in the rainforest, they were co-creating it, transforming it into a productive and culturally rich home for millennia. So, after all this exploration, what are these timeless earthen messages really trying to tell us across the centuries? Perhaps it's something as simple and profound as, we were here. We were organized. We understood the world around us, and we really knew our way around a perfect circle and a remarkably straight line. Or maybe, given their often ceremonial nature, it's an echo of ancient prayers, a reminder of the universal human quest for meaning, for connection with something larger than ourselves, be it the cosmos, the spirits of the forest, or the bonds of community. It just goes to show, whether it's a 1,000-year-old giant earthwork or a particularly elaborate and heartfelt social media post, humans have always had this deep-seated need to declare, I exist. And look at this cool, significant, or beautiful thing I made or thought. Some fundamental urges never really change, do they? Just the scale, the materials, and perhaps the intended audience. It's also a quirky little observation that this ancient impulse to make large-scale marks upon the land, designs best appreciated from a distance or from above, hasn't entirely vanished from the human psyche. Some modern land artists and environmental artists create enormous earthworks or landscape installations that are, in their own way, contemporary echoes of these ancient geoglyphs. Though their cultural meanings and intentions are vastly different, it points to a persistent human fascination with sculpting the earth itself, with leaving a significant, visible trace upon the canvas of the world. The story of the Amazonian geoglyphs is also a powerful lesson in resilience, and perhaps a quiet commentary on fragility. These societies thrived for centuries, developing sustainable ways of life in what many outsiders once considered an inhospitable environment. They built these incredible structures, testament to their social cohesion and shared vision. Then, largely due to external forces beyond their control, the devastating waves of disease and disruption we spoke of, their world was irrevocably changed, their populations declined, and their great works were slowly, gently, reclaimed by the forest. Yet, their voices, their messages in the earth, were not extinguished forever. They lay dormant, waiting. And now, they are being heard again, pieced together by science, and hopefully, increasingly, by the perspectives of their descendants, the contemporary indigenous peoples of the Amazon who continue their own resilient struggles for their cultures, their lands, and their right to self-determination. Their ancestors' voices may have been quieted for a long while, but like the most stubborn and vital seeds, their stories, etched in earth, are pushing through the soil of time once more. It's a good reminder that gone doesn't always mean gone forever, especially if you leave behind really impressive, really enduring landscaping. And this brings us to a profound and ongoing ethical discussion that swirls around these ancient sites today. How do we best protect and manage these remarkable geoglyphs in the face of modern threats? Deforestation continues, agricultural expansion presses in, roads are built, and the impacts of climate change loom large over the entire Amazon basin. How can these irreplaceable pieces of human heritage be safeguarded, and, crucially, how can we ensure that the rights, the perspectives, the ancestral connections, and the living knowledge of contemporary indigenous communities are not just considered, but are absolutely central to these conservation efforts? Their ancestors carved these messages, their descendants are key to understanding and protecting their future. As the first light of a new day might be beginning to touch the ancient earthworks of Acre, or perhaps as you are sinking deeper into the velvety darkness of your own night, let the sheer wonder of these Amazonian geoglyphs settle around you. Imagine those vast, silent shapes, holding their secrets and their stories under the immense canopy of stars, or beneath the gentle touch of the tropical rain. They are a testament to human creativity, to our ability to organize, to find meaning, and to leave an imprint on the world that can, quite literally, endure for ages. The story of the geoglyphs is still unfolding, of course, as new sites are discovered and new understandings emerge from the patient work of researchers and the invaluable insights of local communities. But for tonight, our own gentle exploration of their world must draw to a close. Allow yourself now to drift, to float on the quiet currents of your breath, feeling the weight of history, the vastness of time, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The whispers from those ancient, earthen circles and squares are fading now into the deeper silence of your rest. Let the gentle rhythm of the rainforest, the imagined hum of the deep past, guide you into a peaceful, restorative sleep. There are no more lines to trace, no more mysteries to ponder for now, just the soft, quiet invitation to let go, to relax, to dream.